Thank you, everyone, for joining our next panel. Really exciting opportunity to sit down with this group. I'm going to ask the investors on stage to introduce themselves in a moment, but just to level set, panel's title, Amber Therapeutics, their landmark 100 million Series A, which we're going to dive into, in the future of neuromod for mixed urinary incontinence. I want to ask the investors to introduce themselves, and first, kind of for the audience to understand, one of the uniques of this panel is we have the opportunity to speak with investors in the company, from early investors at company inception to now later stage investors coming in for this larger round, and those that represent strategic investors as well as more traditional financial investors. So first, we'll start at the end with Caroline. I'll ask you to introduce yourself, one sentence on your fund, your investment mandate, what you focus on, and then we'll come around to Aidan.
Sure. So Caroline Gaynor, partner with Lightstone Ventures. So it's a US fund focused on biotech and medtech. Fund size is 375 million. We're typically Series A, but that said, we do invest also at the company creation stage and then later stage as well. I'm based out of the Dublin office and try to keep an eye on what's happening in Europe, as well as getting rolled into the US side too. So, and I do both biotech and medtech.
Liliane.
Super. I'm Liliane Chamas. I'm an investor at Exercise Enterprises. For the ease of this, I'll just call it OSC now on. Okay. So we are an independent investment firm. We're kind of the new kids on the block, so this is a really nice opportunity to also introduce us. We've been around for about 9 years. We're based in Oxford in the UK, and our remit and mandate is really find transformational IP at the University of Oxford, where we have a special relationship that allows us to see IP 2-3 years in advance and kind of blanket NDA with all of the academics. And then we can invest and help build these companies. So we have about $1 billion under management and about a team of 55 that covers everything from life sciences, health tech, med tech, which is where I operate in, and then deep tech, which is kind of quantum, ag tech, software stuff, magic. And we do everything from last year, the smallest ticket that we did in my team at least was $250K for like a very early stage kind of de-risking technology. And the largest was 30 million for our pro rata. So we follow our companies through to exit. And to date, we've had about 8 exits, 2 listings, and we have over 80 portfolio companies. So there's quite a lot going on. And I'm really excited to be part of this.
Thank you. Murielle?
So Murielle McLane, I manage Intuitive Ventures. So if you're the new kid on the block, I guess I'm the toddler.
Yeah.
We're 4 years old, manage $250 million in asset under management over 2 funds. So Fund 1, which is fully invested at this point, and now we're managing 150 out of the Fund 2, where we just started to deploy, and Aidan was our first investment out of that fund. We typically invest in early stage company, but like Liliane can go really from seed all the way to crossover, and typically invest in the area, obviously, of minimal invasive care. We're really thinking about the ecosystem and how we can help reimagine it. And so invest in medtech, diagnostic, and health tech from that perspective.
Great. Aidan, when I ask you to introduce yourself, something I want to have you do as part of talking about Amber and introducing, we're all familiar with Amber. We've seen the headline, 100 million raised, implantable neuromod, closed loop, targeting stress, urge urinary incontinence. But I wanted to understand, this is not just a story about creative financing and an awesome round. This is a story about timing and how timing plays into the unique architecture of this company, the syndicate, and where you're going. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and kind of the unique forces of timing here that played into you being able to put this together and Amber being able to get to where it is.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Aidan Crawley, as Henry said, the founder and CEO of Amber Therapeutics. I think there's 2 timing elements. I think there's the timing of our seed round, and then obviously what led to the Series A. I think, however, an amazing idea in terms of the potential of the therapy that we're developing, the key part to us starting was actually having access to a really good piece of hardware that we could use off the bat. And my background was more software and technology, not medtech. I made the crazy move to go from there to deal with a highly regulated medical device industry. But what I learned is being able to have, in software, the skill is that it's very cheap and very quick to test an idea to see if it has value. And I think one of the really difficult things about medtech is it can often be very long and very expensive to test an idea to see if it has value. And I think that's one of the main perceptions of why it's difficult to invest in as a sector. We got lucky thanks to my co-founder, Tim Dennison, who is an ex-Medtronic guy, brilliant engineer. because we had access to a device that he'd been using for the brain, it meant that we could, from founding the company, get to a first-in-human implant in 18 months on a couple of $1 million or $2.5 million, of which half was actually non-dilutive funding. And if you think about the investment story, that was like a software model where you're able to test and validate that we have a therapy that is what we think it is very, very fast without raising a lot of money. What that does, A, it gets you there fast. B, it builds a lot of trust with your investor base that you can execute on a timeline. And obviously, once you've proven something has a lot of value, then raising the big money, in our case, $100 million to then take it to market makes a lot more sense. And I think, again, the paradox with a lot of the timing stories are it can take you 10 years in medtech to get to that MVP point and cost a lot of money, and you can churn through a whole set of investors and all be quite tired at the end of it. And so we were lucky. I would put it down to, well, not luck, having access to Tim and this device, and there are other ways to do that. But I think that was the timing of the first part of the story. And the only other point I would make, which I made this point yesterday, but with regard to the Series A, I think one of the, and I'd like the investors to maybe back me up on this, but I think one of the misconceptions of a very tough market is, I think in a tough market, it's actually very good for good companies with a good value proposition, because the best funds all want in on the same deals. And I think that it's actually in a very good market, sometimes the best companies, there's so much noise, it gets a bit dispersed. So I'm actually grateful for the toughness of the market, because it brought, and we're missing NEA and F Prime here, but I think it brought the absolute A1 set of US investors all around the table with me, having this discussion of how we could all get involved. And we might not have had that if it had been a really buoyant market back in the early. Anyway, I've dominated.
When we're going to talk about that efficiency and some of the kind of conundrums in medtech, both on this panel and through some of the other sessions today. But Liliane, coming in early when you did, I want to ask you a little bit about what got you excited at the stage that you got excited about the company. Is it the market that they're pursuing, some of these unique architecture points of the product and access they had, these timing forces? You hear Aidan's background coming outside the space. What's the founder market fit look like at that stage? Just kind of unpack your process of thinking about the company at that stage, and then maybe going downstream a little bit. When you guys looked at the company, Caroline and Murielle, what got you excited kind of in the why now to come in on this round?
Sure. So maybe I'll lay some background. In some ways, Aidan and I have a lot in similar. We both came from not medtech space. So by background, I'm a clinical geneticist, and kind of my training was very scientific. So I'm a pain in diligence, because I'm just, when you're a geneticist, you kind of turn every rock. And I think one of the biggest things for me in kind of diligencing and getting to know the opportunity with Amber, well, first of all, it was my first investment ever. I had just been at OSC for a couple of months at that point, and I think Aidan as well. We had started at the same time. Aidan had started as an EIR, which is one of the models that we have for venture building at OSC, and I had started as an investor, and I learned about things like ICs and IMs and ROIs, and I was just thinking, great, I have to produce one of these things and convince our investment committee about this new opportunity. The reason I was excited about it is, one, like whenever, by background as a clinical geneticist, you start with what is the clinical piece, what is the patient paradigm right now, what's missing, what's wrong with it. And it was very quick, particularly obviously these being in a women's issue as well. It was very quick that the fit was clear to me. And, we had to do just a tiny bit of diligence to understand not only is this an underserved market, the technology paradigm is basically lazy, to be honest. There's tons of stigma that means we're only scratching the surface in terms of the population that we do know. And current treatment is just ridiculous. It's like, you try one thing, it doesn't work. You try another, it doesn't work. Well, maybe she won't talk about it again. A lot of that core problem statement struck with me. Obviously, huge market. And then Aidan and Tim had a very compelling vision on how they were going to bring things together. Tim was the leader in the brain space, and he's just like, the plumbing area, the technology they're using down there is dumb. Let me show you how we can lift it. And we just sat down, and it was incredibly compelling. It's funny, I look back at the investment memo that I wrote, and oh my God, I must have had a lot of time to do that. But I think because, a class 3 implantable is not for the faint of heart, and I wanted to make sure my first investment memo was the best. But in that, every question that there was, and I retrospectively apologize to Aidan and the team, but we spent a lot of time on diligence, even for like a small ticket at that time, because we wanted to make sure that we understood, how do we future-proof this? Yes, we have a system right now that enables us to go first in human right away, but that's someone else's system. and other people have systems, and what does it mean going to market, and what does it mean for the exit at the end? And I think it was that type of questioning that we kind of brainstormed initially, and it allowed us to very aggressively develop quite an interesting strategy early on for such an early stage company. So yeah, that was the exciting bit for me, and this company in some ways is kind of also my baby, because we started from such a young stage with it. So it's incredible to be sitting on a panel where we have, you know, proper blue chip investors coming in and kind of supporting the journey onward.
That's on to me, yes. So from the Lightstone perspective, I guess a couple of things, and probably more than a couple. We've always had an interest in the OAB space, or incontinence, I should say more generally, and had taken many pitches over the years. I think internally there was an acceptance that the pudendal nerve is the brain of what we're trying to do, and we would never came across anyone doing that. It always galled me that, you know, women with incontinence are forced to choose whether they're OAB or SUI, which is more annoying. It's like they're both really annoying. We need to deal with both of them. And, you know, the proposition of women having one quite invasive procedure and then having to do another suboptimal procedure to deal with the SUI component never resonated. So when we came across Amber, for me, it was pretty exciting to see that we could, for the first time, address both indications in one. So that was the thing that got me really excited. Then when we met with the team, what Aidan talked about, it, you know, just proving your concept real quick with off the shelf. Now, you can't do that in every indication, I understand, but here there was the possibility. We work and partner very closely with the foundry, and that's their whole ethos. So there's a kindred spirit vibe on that pitch, and I know my engineering team came off pretty excited. You know, these guys have actually pulled stuff off the shelf and done what we wish every startup would do, just prove there's a there. So that was there, and it also gave us confidence that this team think like we do, and want to achieve the same things we do. And then it came down to the usuals, you know, who else is around the table? Take the financing risk off the table. Do we have a nice clinical strategy? But everything started falling into place for us. And we got pretty excited. And again, I know we said it, but it really is a huge market and it's massively underpenetrated. So if you can bring that right product to the right patients, I think there's something special here. And it's the right agile team. And I love the kind of tech mindset. It's a little bit like the Foundry Incubator vibe of let's just keep motoring on, because the expensive part is all to come. So let's just prove it's worth putting all that money into. So I guess that's what got us excited and around the table.
Absolutely. Murielle, I want to adapt the question a little bit using something that Carolyn just said, that the expensive part is to come. Obviously, you're in this for a while, but as Aidan was talking about, this is a very unique opportunity to repurpose technology that Medtronic doesn't already own for this purpose and apply it to a space that's massively underserved. You represent the strategic side of the equation, and obviously Intuitive Ventures is a little bit different than some of the corporate balance sheet CVCs. But we were talking a few minutes ago, you know, after Duke's keynote about the efficiency problem in medtech and the new models that are needed. This company seems like it fits into this kind of new model, new paradigm. Talk about how this compares to a little bit of the problem we see in medtech more broadly, and how, as a strategic, where on the other end of the equation, strategics are buying things later, M&A's had some challenges. How does this differentiate from the pack potentially in medtech and align incentives better between investors and the company itself?
Yeah, so I would say I'll step back to part of why we invested is exactly because Aidan did this sort of leap forward in development. I mean, I met Aidan when he had done just a few experiments. He hadn't bought the company yet. And we were sort of saying, great way to actually get through the paradigm of the development. Now go show me you can execute in acquisition and integration. So to me, that was the biggest piece. We knew there was a massive need. We knew that he had it there. But show me you're the guy that can actually go execute around it, and you have the right team around you to do it. So we talked for 12 months, I think, through that process, or a little longer. And so I'm going to get to the why the corporate. So what Aidan has done is what we want to see, frankly, more of is entrepreneurs that can execute faster. And yes, it's going to take a lot of cash. So then it's about the syndicate and who's around the table, and or do we have the same vision for the company, a big vision, and go execute around it, and not necessarily thinking about strategic as acquirer. I mean, this needs to be a standalone company, not just a tuck-in for somebody else. So for us, it was really that vision, or for me, that vision that got us to be excited and come to the table. Now going to corporate, yes, everybody wants a de-risk asset that's cheap. It's nothing is new there. And that's what so coming later and paying less is certainly something that everybody wants to do. And then the market forces are the market forces. So I would say that, yes, you'll see acquisition that may happen later in some space because it's about getting, traction in the marketplace and execution, or sooner. But at the end of the day, what a strategic is going to look at is not only the clinical data, but it's the team and can they execute around it, and how cost effective can they be at executing, and does that make sense rather than developing internally, right? At the end of the day, we're all trying to optimize our capital deployment.
Yeah. Aidan, talk about acquiring and integrating the company, what Murielle was referencing there. I'm not sure everyone knows that story of acquisition and integration.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good one in the sense of we were, again, lucky on the one hand that we got to buy the company at the exact right moment. If we'd had to buy the company at the beginning, it would have been a very hard sell to investors to buy some not old, but a company that's made hardware for a long time to go and test an idea. I mean, I would say that Tim and I always thought that we would get a chance because we saw how the company was doing. We loved the device and the engineering team. So you just got to go forward and hope you get the right moment. And then the company began to struggle a bit, I would say, sort of early summer last year, and we kept pressing and pressing. And then, in hindsight, got to buy the company at the exact right time. We'd had our early stage clinical results that had proved the value of the therapy. We were homeless at that point. So, if we hadn't bought this company, I don't know what we'd have done. We certainly wouldn't have raised a big round. We'd have probably had to farm out our therapy idea to, the dreaded strategics, at that point. And so the great thing is we did the deal to buy the company just before things got really tough. Because again, when you buy a company, you never want to buy a company that is a fire sale because you've lost culture and people and everyone's so we managed to just navigate buying the team, taking the assets, even making the existing shareholders happy, with kind of the way the deal worked, even though it wasn't a kind of massive acquisition for us. And then you do have that secondary problem of, so now we were vertically integrated. We owned the therapy, we owned the hardware, we owned the manufacturing. We are really a genuine threat to go the whole way. And that was critical to the story. But again, timing wise, we were super lead at the beginning. We didn't own anything. We just had a therapy idea we could test fast. Then we could buy the company. And as everyone knows, like, integration is hard because you inherit a culture. And we are fast moving, more tech-like culture. And the fact that this company had been around for 20 years meant the people who were still there were very resilient, but often there's a cultural difference. And so that there is a very critical period about making sure that you can navigate that correctly and kind of instill your culture, keep the right people, etc. So I would say really as of just now, that integration process is, we've consolidated, but it was our biggest opportunity, but a very difficult one to navigate.
If I could add, like, some of the magic there, and Aidan mentioned it a bit earlier, I think he made quite a lot of interesting early decisions that helped at least the case that I was building, again, back to the dreaded IC, our investment committee, because basically they're like, hold on, you just seeded this company a year ago with a tech guy as a CEO, and there's 4 people in the company. We only have read out on 3 patients, and you want to buy a whole new company integrated. There's about 30 people in that company. And, it was a fun IC, that one. But I think some of the decisions that Aidan had to take early on, so he had de-risked our investment, and we always encourage that with non-dilutive funding. And that was really interesting because he had applied to a public body to get the non-dilutive funding is almost equal to what we had provided. In some ways, we had seen kind of experts in the field both validate and kind of go through their own line of diligence to kind of make sure that that clinical piece and the market piece was kind of validated externally from a needs perspective as well. He was kind of nimble and agile and hadn't diluted himself and the founders. They were still driven. There were 4 of them working. I mean, at that time, Aidan, we were still all on Zoom. There was, for the longest time, no one had met because this was still like post-COVID where the UK was a bit mad. So a lot of that work had started without anyone physically having met. Wow. And meanwhile, on Zoom, I'm making the case for IC for, hey, let's do this. There's a moment of insanity where, like, actually, listen, we've read out positively. This is looking so good. There's an asset that's perfect. We did our technical diligence on the side. We spoke to all the top people, and they all said, by God, this device is exactly what this company would need. It gives you all the optionality. And it just it made sense in an insane moment where also the markets were going down. No one wanted to put money in early. So,
And I should add, I mean, I am very grateful to OSC for that particular moment. There are not many funds that, and effectively they lent me the money as a convertible loan, so I didn't have to price around at a very bad market at a time where that was just them putting their neck out to support me in this acquisition that honestly has made the whole difference, not just to the fundraise, but to giving us what we have today. And so there are many examples where you get given a £10 million loan to buy a company to do an integration ahead of a big fundraise with no visibility on that fundraise being successful. And so in hindsight, it all makes total sense. If we hadn't bought the company, 10 years work to get to this point, so it was worth it. But I'm just saying it's a very nice investor story, which you don't have that many of, where someone actually puts their neck out, in a market that's high risk.
Yeah, it's a testament to the value that those strong investor founder partnerships can add. And I am curious, now having a strategic on the cap table obviously is an evolution. You bring in Lightstone as well, and as you mentioned, partners like Tiffany from NEA and Kevin from F Prime that are not here on this panel today, but will be with us in Dana Point. I'm curious, what has it been like having a strategic on the cap table? Caroline, I know you've worked with strategics on cap tables in other companies. What's it like working with strategics on cap tables in companies at this stage?
Look, coming from,
And I'll plug Murielle's ears so she can.
no, I come from pharma, so I was a nasty strategic at some point. I think what it brings is that product focus. They know the market, they know what it takes to actually get there at the end. And it's great because Aidan gets this, but so often what we miss on teams is having that, right? Understanding this is a product, these are the marketing messages I need to deliver at the end. Now we work backwards and figure out the perfect trials. And having a strategic is great because they live that every day. That's how they think, that's the mindset. So at this stage of the company, I think it's helpful because they can always help back up that story and give you sort of where you're going at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'll make one extra point on that, which is I think we get with Intuitive the benefits of a strategic without the drawback.
Yeah.
So they're not a strategic like a buyer strategic in terms of they're not in the urinary incontinence space like a Medtronic or now a Boston. But they think like a strategic because that's where they come from. So I can just say, even from the due diligence process, there was a very different flavor of questions being asked and the way that the due diligence process ran with Murielle compared to the other three. Yeah. Things like reimbursement and the payer environment is one example I can think of. Yeah. And that was one thing from our company, we got immediate feedback being like, they're asking really interesting questions that are coming from a different perspective. And that's where it's valuable.
Yeah.
And we're not tainted by, there's another strategic who might buy us and everyone thinks we're a buy to build,
Yeah. Murielle, how is it different for you when you're on a board like this and working with a company that is kind of outside Intuitive's core focus areas versus when you're on maybe a robotics company or an adjunctive digital play to something that offers direct value to one of Intuitive's core business units?
So they're not the only ones. About a half of my portfolio are actually outside of the core of what we do, or in not having collaboration necessarily with Intuitive. I would say that for all of those companies, what's common is for us is having a grand vision and being transformative in a space, and so and having the right syndicate to help execute. To Aidan's point, we really think about what is it going to be like when we're in market? How are we going to be successful commercially, and therefore what does it mean in the development process? And we try to be very diligent of bringing that back, being in our core, not our core, frankly. Mm-hmm. Very, very important. I came from biotech as well, and earlier in my career, and I remember very much having to deal with portfolios where something was developed, they throw it against, over the fence from R&D to commercial, and they're like, go sell this. Mm-hmm. Here we're trying to come a little earlier and be able to really look at product market fit. And that's something that I must say, Aidan the board here is extremely receptive and really love working with folks that are really think about this in a different way.
When you think about the arc of the company, obviously we're hearing a lot about what Aidan's done well and what Aidan and the team have done right, both at the timing, with the development and efficiency. But I want to ask you and your investors a little bit to tell on you, what has Amber maybe gotten wrong or not done as well? I think we see the headline, we assume it's been nothing but success and smooth sailing up to this point, and it's going to continue to be that way. Aidan, maybe I'll start with you. A mistake or a learning, hiccup in the road, and then to the investors as well, kind of piggybacking on that or a similar example of where there was a learning or a rough patch that you were able to work through together?
I would say, I'll think of it, I'm going to try and think of a mistake, but I think the hardest thing, so underneath the glossy surface, is actually keeping the momentum. And it's been a rapid first, period, as I said, from going from inception to this fundraise. Very, very hard to keep that momentum. Like, we have so much work between now and the next real value creation moment, which is, FDA approval. Now we have to internally build value all the time and keep team incentivized and keep trying to work at the same pace, but it is hard and slow. And so I think for me that the hardest thing underneath the gloss of a fundraise is how can we take this startup, almost tech mentality, keep the pace of the team without burning everyone out, and keep the value creation story, at least internally, as we move towards the next big milestone. In terms of like mistakes, I think the hardest thing, as I said, was actually the acquisition and the integration, but it's absolutely necessary. And it's just keeping, everything with a good company comes down to people, how you keep the right people engaged. Like my 3 co-founders are now more full-time with the company, but at the time it was remote. They were all working with their universities, and just, it was quite a fragmented environment, and it's very hard to drive culture and momentum. So I think those were the hairy moments. I think now we're building a new facility and we've got some capital and we're all in one place. We can navigate those. But I think the hardest thing for me is the maintenance of momentum.
I want to press you a little bit before I go to the investors. Obviously a very different scale, but I was working at Auris Health when J&J integrated us, and obviously there's been some news around that whole play out, but fully remote during COVID, buys Auris, 6 months later they buy Verb, put all the companies together, move the office from Redwood City to Santa Clara. We're all on Zoom and they say play nice. I think there's a lot of things they would probably want to do over in that process. 4 people acquiring a team of 30, new technology. Is there anything you would do differently that, you look back on? You had success with it, obviously, came out the other side, but anything you'd do differently?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think enforcing more in-person Scrum-like work. I think I kind of accepted that we're a remote culture, and we had also the trouble of being in 4 different locations and doing a trial in Belgium. Seeing now the amount you can get through when you put everyone in a room and say you're not leaving until we get to this next juncture, I sort of wish I'd done a little bit more of that. And it was hard, but it was doable. If I'd created more like we need to do, close out this phase gate of a submission process, and the way we're going to do it is I'm going to get a hotel room and get everyone in the company to come spend 3 days until we leave. I think we could have been a little bit more efficient and not had some of those slightly corrosive interactions where people are stewing over a week offline and you don't find out about it, and it's just. We still move fast, but looking back in hindsight, there's just nothing beats getting everyone in a room and hammering it out. So I think I would going back, I would have tried to do that a bit.
He still seems too perfect. Liliane, can you give me something from the early days?
You want there, don't you?
Let's give me something.
But just out of interest, because sometimes we end up, like, the lights are shining, we talk to a room and I don't quite know who's here, just to kind of work out what flavor the dirt should look like. I'm trying to work out who's in the crowd. How many investors are in the crowd, if I can ever even see? Oh, wow, so who's everyone else? How many CEOs are in the crowd? Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. And then I guess the rest are strategics, the dreaded strategics, or whoever else. Okay, this is helpful because I think sometimes we end up talking and not necessarily catering. But actually, the 2 things that I was going to mention actually apply to the majority of the crowd. We find quite a lot, especially with kind of companies that are academic, have academic roots and academic founders, that, for all the right reasons, the company initially is in preservation mode and is very dilution sensitive, really thinks hard about, well, do I need this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Aidan drove a really tough negotiation game. That's a Christmas I'll never get back. Thank you, Aidan. But that was a time where I'm like, Aidan, I'm pretty sure you need double that money. This is at the outset. He's like, no, I'm going to get dilutive and I don't need that money and this is the valuation that I want. And I was like, well, you're kind of 10 times over where I think the valuation should be. And we reached a good point, but gosh, that was hard. And I think, but that discipline that he had on kind of iteration, kind of being agile, but kind of dilution sensitive, I think I completely get it. I would do the same if I was in his shoes. But in some ways, I think you're a different DNA, but that requires tenacity. Because basically, then you guys all ran raw, right? Like it was, I don't know how everyone didn't burn out because I think you should have raised, the initial round should have been twice what we put in. This is even before the acquisition, just to give the man and your team some room to live, really. I think you worked incredibly hard. Exactly. But the interesting bit is flipped now, right? So I think that spirit, and the team has learned through it. So the spirit is different now because 100 million raise is exactly the antithesis of that. This is saying we need to get somewhere. We're probably going to make mistakes. We don't want to waste time going out to market again, because going out to market is an incredible opportunity because we get these beautiful souls, but also incredibly tough, right? Like Aidan, you were working 150% doing diligence, and then there was the company to run. So
7 months.
yeah, so I think it went from a place where you didn't raise enough capital to begin with and you ran extra hard. And I now talk to all of my founders about exactly that. Like, think about, just give yourself 30-40% more because you're going to need it in medtech. But now I think we've done exactly the opposite with this story, whereby we're just thinking hard about, let's just make sure we have that buffer and like think carefully.
100 million sounds like a lot, but it would still be the cheapest, raise to get to FDA approval if we could. And I always like to caveat my team with that as well. I mean, even Axonics took, more capital than that, I think, to get to their FDA approval. So it's not that much.
Carolyn, I want to ask you, coming in now, when you think about, we're looking, a little retrospective on some of the past challenges, next 18 months, what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges? What are you thinking about now as the risks you need to retire, the things you're, oh boy, I know we're going to have to work through this, or I know this is coming and I'm getting prepared for it?
Yeah. I mean, look, that's half the reason behind the 100 million, right? People always ask that. And I think as early stage investors, you see you don't get value necessarily for all this hard piece to come. You get value for when you've actually proven it. Mm-hmm. And so that was a bit of the reason. All the hard bits are to come. We have a proof of concept. This is essentially a double indication no one's gone after before. There'll be all that complexity around how you run that trial, how the endpoints look, how we're going to get there, how many pre-pivotal studies do we need to do. And that's all how, what we're working through now. And on top of that, as we mentioned, Aidan's coming into this as from startup to 100 million raise. There's a lot of team that has to be built out. So you're trying to manage getting that plan forward right, because you get one shot at it. And as he rightly said, 100 million is actually pretty cheap to get to FDA approval if we do it right. But it's a lot. So I would say there's a ton of complexity ahead. We're at the very early stages, but I think the board works really well together to make sure we're trying to at least risk mitigate where we can, and come out the other end of this with the best possible data set. But yeah, work in progress, I would say. It's all ahead, all of it.
Speaking of what's coming ahead, one more question kind of before we go into the wrap up here. And I love Aidan and Murielle's perspective on it. If you ask investors, a lot of times what they're looking for outstanding founders that are running super capital efficient companies in giant markets with no competition. And super easy to find, right? If I had wheels, I'd be a wagon. But a question for you, Aidan, how do you think about competition? Is it validating of the space you're pursuing? Is it a headwind that you're going to have to deal with? Is it something that has played into your conversations with investors previously as either an impetus or a motivator? How do you think about the competition in the market? And then over to Murielle.
So I think about competition, honestly, as the best thing because it in the one sense. Mm-hmm. So having people interested in the space and developing, products, and if you're Axonics getting sold for $3.7 billion to a company like Boston, all that drives interest and attention to your space, mm-hmm. which ultimately makes it more valuable. Obviously, what I don't want is, when I say direct competition, someone copying our therapy or trying to do exactly what we're doing and having more money and going, but we don't have that right now. Mm-hmm. So I think the more energy and innovation that is being applied to the space brings attention and light and improves the value and ultimately will serve the market better. That's all positive, provided our product's always better and we're so there's two elements of competition, but on the whole, very positive.
And Murielle, when you think about competition, how do you think about it when you look to invest in companies?
Competition is healthy. I mean, to Aidan's point, it's really hard to be a market maker. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot easier when the market actually understands the problem, mm-hmm. And that there is inferior solution to what you're coming in after. So that was one of the big attraction here. Aidan is looking at SUI and OAB at the same time. So he's looking at a market that obviously others have developed. So there's a really good understanding of the problem, while coming at it with a very superior solution, frankly. And that was really what attracted us. So really, really important. We haven't invested yet in an area where it's like, hey, there's this new market that nobody's gone after before. Being the first in any market is really hard. So we look at it as it's healthy to have competition, and we want to come at that market with a very novel solution.
Fantastic. we'll start to wrap up here, and I'll start with Caroline. We'll work our way down with some closing thoughts. And the question I'll pose for closing thoughts, when we all reconvene in March in Dana Point in the U.S., we'll, of course, have Aidan. We'll have a regroup of where Amber is. It's already booked. You're done. You're there. But we'll have you, and we'll also hopefully have some of our other friends like Tiffany from NEA and Kevin from F Prime to speak to the investor side as well. Where will we be then with Amber? What will have changed, and what will be the things that that we're discussing around the future of the company?
Yeah, well, I would hope at that stage we've possibly pinned down what we're clinically, or what direction we'll pursue and how. We're almost there. So I think from that perspective, the road forward will be a ton clearer. Team additions will be made and bulked up, and we'll be hopefully in a great position to start executing at speed, like he's been proven so good at doing to date. So all good, I hope.
I think Caroline covered most of it, really. I mean, to me, it's been really interesting to see kind of the hurrah and hooray about the raise, and saying Aidan's face printed on buses all over town, or it feels like it, like everywhere you go, there's something about it. And I mean, that's great that you guys have been celebrating, but really the real work starts or continues now. So I'm excited to let's remove the facade of 100 million financing and kind of join the rest of the conversation, which is there's people hard at work doing really difficult stuff, and we are excited to share progress, just like everyone else in this room is. So I'm excited to get to that point, and hopefully what will be in Dana Point is you'll have someone else that you've printed the face of on a bus, and someone else is celebrating.
No more magazine articles for a while, I promise.
Thank God. No, those are really lovely, by the way. But no, genuinely, I think, celebrations aside, and welcome to everyone on the board, and that's great. But I think the board's attitude, at least, is let's get to work. And Aidan's first call, when I had a call and we knew that everything was closed, I was like, congratulations. Like, no, Liliane, the work continues and starts. And that's exactly the attitude on execution that allows us to back him, because that's what needs to happen.
Fantastic.
Further execution and scaling. I mean, it's really, really important right now. Well, no, that's why you raise 100, right? It's in order to be able to get the team to go and execute and get to start looking at, okay, what's the clinical and regulatory strategy? How do we execute on it? And even having started to do some of that hard work. So I concur, the hard work has just started. Not that there was no hard work before, but we're doing it at scale this time.
Yeah, and for me, I don't want to put a timer on it, because we know, as from the last panel, the idea of doing everything on time and budget, you don't want to have to swear by that, especially when something's being recorded. But for me, I'm paranoid about getting to the next clinical validation point. Like, until we have the next set of implants based on all the modifications we've done, we kind of don't know where we stand since our first in human. We have a mountain of work to get there, and we won't have started a trial, but hopefully we're pretty close to the European feasibility by the March panel. And it's all invisible work. Like, it doesn't, until we have completed that and get to the clinical validation point, we don't know where we stand. So I'm paranoid about getting to that point, and then maybe for LSI the year after, then it's the interesting.
Love it. Well, great. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for speaking with us today, and enjoy the rest of the day.